Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tonkean weekly demo. I'm Ben Shipley. I'm a product specialist here, and I'm going to be walking you through Tonkean, a couple of use cases, and answering some questions for you towards the end. So I'm not a big fan of slides, so I'm just going to give a quick introduction, just talking normally, and then we'll jump into the demo. So I'm a product expert here at Tonki, and I've been with the company for a little over 2 years. I work with some of our large enterprises in both a pre-sales capacity to help them define and scope out workflows, and then in a post-sales capacity to help them actually implement and go live with them. Tonkean itself, Series A backed startup. We work with companies like Google, Hyatt, Grubhub, and we are an orchestration platform that's helping companies integrate different SaaS solutions and databases together, optimize processes through a 100% no-code workflow builder, and maintain all of the security, governance, and compliance that the IT team requires to make sure that you can scale our solution across the organization in a safe and compliant way. So in this demo today, I'm going to focus on really those three parts, and let's get right into it. Go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys, if you can't see my screen, send a message. But this is Tonki. The platform itself is actually going to be broken out into 4 different components. There's going to be the Solution Studio, which is what you're seeing here. Enterprise Components, which is where you get everything connected. Business Reports, which are Tableau-like dashboards that come on top of every workflow. And then a runtime dashboard where you get an administrative bird's eye view of all the things that are happening in your environment. The Solution Studio is where you actually create and optimize different workflows. But before doing that, you actually have to get things connected, which is where the Enterprise Components tab comes in. So in Tonkean, we can talk to anything as long as there's an API, right? Even if it's in your databases, as long as there's some way for Tonkean to talk to it via API or webhook, we're able to connect this as a data source and then use it in any of the workflows subsequently. So things like cloud applications, any tier 1, tier 2 SaaS application, like a Salesforce, a Zendesk, Jira, for example. Connecting is as easy as copy and pasting an API key in, or logging or OAuthing in with a service account or a personal account. For other types of tools, things like spreadsheets, databases, chat applications like Microsoft Teams or Slack, email inboxes, very similar process for getting those connected. Just OAuth in or copy and paste an API key. And then what's really cool here with Tonkean is if we don't have a connector to it, so a custom database or custom application, for example, what Tonkean will actually do is create a webhook that we will expose that you can then point your application's API towards, and Tonkean will automatically take that, put it into a tabular format, and allow you to configure all the fields, the rows, the security, what's encrypted, what's not, and actually create any custom actions within the application. So think of this as like a MuleSoft, but just much easier to use. So you create a custom action from your custom data source using JSON, and then you can actually use it in the workflow, the Solution Studio, again and again, whether you understand how the JSON or the APIs work or not. So you see really a general trend here, where in this applications or in this Enterprise Components tab, you usually have a admin, system architect actually connect these systems and give the right privileges initially, and then you hand that off to the business to develop, or you yourself as the technologist develop, but just much more rapidly than if you had to write raw code. Other cool things here from a security and governance standpoint, for everything that you have connected, you're able to identify what are the retention rules for the different fields that we have, right? What are the admin privileges for this data source? Who can actually see and edit the data source that you have connected? For the workflows that you have, which solutions have access to this particular data source, right? So you can start being really, really secure in how you roll Tonkean out across the organization and giving the principle of least privilege to only the people that need to have access to the different sources that you have. Once you have all of that connected, you're off to the races. We've removed the different silos between data sources, and we can actually go ahead and start doing cool stuff in between systems here in the Solution Studio. So I'm going to hop over here. The way that Tonkean works from a solutions perspective is we have these darker gray rectangles, which we call solutions, and then we have these lighter white rectangles, which we call modules. You think of modules as workflows that all fall under a same solution and are usually trying to solve a common business goal. These are all different because it's for a demo, but ideally you would have like a legal triage solution or a customer onboarding solution. We don't limit the number of workflows you can have under a solution. You can actually, under the same licensing model, have an infinite amount of these workflows under one solution. We want you to be able to build as complex an ecosystem of workflows as you need, but they all should be pointing to the same business problem, because each solution will have a finite number of people who can edit, people who can publish, and systems that are actually connected to it. To create a solution in Tonkean, or a module, we go ahead and click this button, simple webinar module. And I'll jump into a live example after this, but I want to show you how easy it is to actually set up and how you kind of read Tonkean. So the way Tonkean works is you have a Tonkean bot that is always monitoring a data source. That data source is going to be any of those things that you've connected in the previous tab, in that enterprise components tab. So that could be something like Salesforce, a SaaS application, or Workday. It could be any kind of custom application that you guys have set up, right? It could be an email inbox. It could be a database. We don't really care. We're totally agnostic. Once you actually set one of these up, for example, Salesforce, let's monitor accounts. I'm not going to do that. Tonkean will always be monitoring that, and you can then go ahead and take action off of it whenever a business trigger is fired. A business trigger is going to be, basically, you can think of it like a SQL query that we abstracted into a point and click mechanism. So for example, go ahead and pick a data field that we're monitoring. Go ahead and pick an operator, contains, is older than, etc. And then add as many and or clauses as you'd like. Whenever that business logic is met, one of these triggers will be fired, and you can do what we're calling an action block. An action block is going to be one of three things: a data action. So this is going to be anything that an API allows, any of the sort of repetitive button clicking, copying down of data, transforming of data, uploading of data that you would do in the system. So for Zendesk, it could be something like creating a ticket. And again, this is all 100% no code, right? If you want to create a ticket in Zendesk, you basically are just copying over the data fields or hard coding them in, and then you're off to the races. And this is going to be true for any system. So for Salesforce, it could be updating an opportunity. For Ironclad, it could be moving a contract. For ServiceNow, it could be appending a ticket. For Workday, it could be updating a record. We think of all SaaS applications as just databases that have business logic and a UI on top of it. Pretty much all applications, right? But at the end of it, the database is just rows and columns. And because of the APIs, Tonkean can edit, update, delete, create anything they want within those rows and columns, right? Second thing you can do, which is actually really powerful with Tonkean, is what we're calling a people coordination action. So this is the ability to do human-in-the-loop functionality within a workflow. So anytime in a workflow when the bot doesn't know what to do, or when you do want a human to come in and actually give sort of a higher complexity answer or have a decision-making point, you're able to do one of these actions, things like asking a question, assigning next steps, sending a notification, etc. And you do that where the person wants to live. So in any of the communication platforms that you connect in that previous tab. So things like email, Google Chat, Slack, Microsoft Teams, any of the other communication sources that you guys have. I heard a bubble pop up, but this is actually my first time using this platform. I apologize. So I'm gonna save questions to the end. Apologies on that. So you're able to basically select the person, the group of people, a specific person, at a specific email address. It doesn't matter. Be able to send any text. Be able to include any of the data fields that you're tracking from Salesforce, Zendesk, whatever that may be. And you're able to add functionality, whether that's an action button, whether that's a form, whether that's free text. And based on what the person clicks, yes, or escalate, for example, you can then go on and do different actions in different systems, right? So we're marrying this concept of some of a workflow is going to be repetitive data actions, and you can automate that here. It's probably what you're most used to with automation platforms. But some of it is going to need human input, and we're able to solve for that as well. Because if you look at this, right, when this is fired, the person will just get a Slack message that looks like this. We don't have a field filled out here, but it would just say, hey, Bob, can you come in and give some extra color here? And then the person doesn't have to leave. They don't have to go and create a ticket or go learn a new portal. They just type in the answer, fill out a form, and they're off to the races. Last thing you can do is a workflow specific thing. So Tonkean has a bunch of built-in NLP, OCR, cool things like wait triggers, where you can add complex business triggers within a workflow to tell it to wait until it sees a certain set of conditions matched. Updating a field, kicking off a module within a module. These are all sort of more powerful features that allow you to take it even further when you're building out workflows. And the last thing that I want to point out is this idea of a matched entity. So in Tonkean, if you want to connect different data sources, all you need is some sort of unique identifier. So something like an email address or an account ID, and you're able to take different data sources and you're able to link them together based on that unique identifier. So for example, an email address comes in, you can automatically go and link that email address to an account with a corresponding email address in Salesforce, or a ticket that's already opened in Intercom, and allows you to pull in all of that information from those different accounts. So think of it as like a VLOOKUP for your different data sources that you have. So moving into an actual live example, I'm going to run down to something that I built. This was actually for sort of a dumbed down version for a larger B2B performance monitoring company. You can think of this as anytime a legal team, a marketing team, a sales team gets a question about whether they have authority to do something, what the compliance or implications are. In this particular case, it's the sweepstakes. Am I allowed to send this customer this gift, or am I allowed to put this promotion on for this customer? This particular workflow, the data source is going to be Slack. It's starting from a form that originates in Slack. The business trigger is just every time one of these new forms gets filled out. And then we start doing cool things, dissecting what type of form it is, what the information the person puts in. And based on that information, we go ahead and do one of two things. In the first scenario, where it's something that's a potential compliance risk, in this case, they're asking to set a sweepstakes out to a public healthcare company, we automatically go ahead and create a Zendesk ticket and then notify the appropriate person on the legal team. We then monitor that ticket to monitor for the status to equal solved. So again, the difference between automating a task versus optimizing an end-to-end process. We're going to go ahead and go back to that person in Slack and say, hey, your ticket's been solved. Here's the result. The second situation is a situation that's much simpler, a private tech company. If the company is over a certain size, it qualifies as enterprise, and they offer a set of sweepstake options for them. At that point, we'll go ahead and create a document from a template, ask the rep if that document looks okay. If they say yes, I've only architected the happy path here, we'll turn that document into a PDF, create an envelope in DocuSign, and then go ahead and send that envelope out. So let's jump into Slack and see what that actually looks like. Go to Tonkean here. Just type in a quick thing to start it off. Oh, got it wrong. Mistake. There we go. Spelling error, my bad. So we type in our email. So this is me trying to commission. Instead of like emailing someone or asking my boss if I can do this, right? I can start this workflow off from Slack or from Salesforce or really from any medium that I want. It really cuts out a lot of the back and forth that's associated with intake requests or general requests. We'll pick the company type. We'll do the first example, this sort of like high compliance risk example. It's a public sector company. It's in healthcare. So we'll go ahead and submit that. We'll go ahead and pop up a different form here, or Tonkean will, to ask for the company name, Acme Co, opportunity size, say 150,000, and description. This is an example description of my healthcare stakes. So we'll submit that. If we go back to Tonkean, what should be happening here is that Tonkean is monitoring this data source. It's seeing that this form has been created and then followed up with. And then it should be creating a Zendesk ticket. I think you heard that ping, and sending a notification back to the rep. So if we come back here, it says, we've escalated this to the appropriate parties to review, and a ticket has been created in Zendesk. You can track the status here. So now, without ever leaving Slack, and again, this could be any communication platform, I've created this request. We haven't gotten a human involved, but we've gotten all the necessary information from the person, and we've created a ticket, assigned it to the right person, and added the information that we got both from the person and from the form, right? Acme Co, $150,000, just a naming convention for how we want to name and organize these tickets. Now me, I'm switching my hat now to the manager or the legal person or compliance person. I'm going to say, we cannot approve this because there is a conflict of interest with Acme Co. I'll go ahead and change this to solved. And again, if we go back to this demo, once this updates, you should, with this match condition, Tonkean's again always monitoring these data sources. It'll see that that ticket status has changed to solved. And again, completely no code, just selecting the field, selecting the operator. and it'll send a notification back to the person. Your sweepstakes tickets has been resolved. See the result here. So again, your sweepstakes ticket has been resolved. Now, me as the rep, in almost instantaneous time, get an update. I can click into this ticket and understand what's happening and further escalate or triage from here. If I wanted to build more off this, just click a plus button and then, edit however you want. Maybe you could escalate that. Maybe you can get a manager involved. Whatever you want to do is up to you. But again, just showing the sort of ease of being able to transition between a bunch of different systems and a bunch of different business logic. Let's jump now into the happy path. So the happy path is something that's completely automatable. Get this sweepstakes thing back in again. Type in my email address, and we'll treat the company type as private sector technology. The Tonkean business trigger is picking up on this. Okay, it's something different. Let's go ahead and pop up this company name. What's a cool company right now? Let's say Netflix, for example. Opportunity size, let's say 300,000. That's going to be over 250, which is the business trigger threshold for whether it's a medium opportunity versus an enterprise opportunity. And we'll do the prospect email as bob.smith@netflix.com. Submit this. Now we see a dynamic form pops up because we realize that it's a technology company. We realize that it's enterprise. So we're going to have a dynamic set of sweepstakes options that we could pick from. I'll say Michelin star restaurant, and I'll submit this. So take a second to process, but if we go back into the flow, what's happening now is Tonkean has actually identified the right path. It's going to go ahead and create a document from a template where we're just taking the fields that we got in from the form, from the person, and we're spitting that back out to the person in Slack saying, we've created the sweepstakes. Here's what it should look like. So if we jump back into Slack, hey, we've created the sweepstakes document. We've sent it to send out to Bob Smith at Netflix. Again, totally dynamic. Here is the link to the document. What would you like to do? I'm having problems. I'll send it myself or send the DocuSign. First, let's go ahead and take a look at this. What does this document actually look like? So we've created this document from a template. We've added the dynamic information, Netflix, Bob Smith at netflix.com. And you can add as much. This is a very simple example, but this could be much more granular. So me as the rep, I say, okay, that looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and send that off to DocuSign. And if we go back to our demo, what should be happening here is, sorry, computer freezing a little bit. Turns that into a PDF, creates an envelope, adds the document, sends the envelope, and then we'll go ahead and send this notification back to the user saying the document's been sent. Boom. So let's just go ahead and double check to make sure. I had this sent to myself just for the purposes of the demo, but you can see here, sweepstakes for the doc. Can pop in to review this document. You can see it happen just in real time. And again, this might not be a use case that you guys particularly care about. But what is really cool is that basically any workflow that you're going to have at your company is going to be this combination of data actions, right? Part of it's super repetitive, right? Just creating a document from a template or creating a Zendesk ticket, right? And part of it is going to be human focused. Hey, I actually want to send this information to a person, get a response, get some feedback, and then go ahead and do something else with it. And part of it's going to be business logic. Hey, Tonkean, can you just look at this forever until a status changes or an amount equals this or is greater than this or whatever the business logic may be. And we're giving you this 100% no code platform, sort of like blank canvas, so to speak, for you guys to marry all three of those together to optimize virtually any business process. We work very closely with most departments, and we're usually owned and maintained by an IT or a technology team. Last thing I want to show you guys is the business reports, because that's pretty cool. And then I will hop into the main chat for questions. So if we look at this email triage bot, right? Again, it doesn't have to be a form. In this case, we're starting from an email inbox. A request comes in, and then we do a bunch of cool stuff with it based on the business triggers. But every workflow will have a report on top of it. This one is actually built out. It's totally customizable per workflow. And it will show you aggregate metrics, things like how often is the bot running, how much of it's being automated versus needs manual touch points. All of these things are completely customizable metrics, right? And then a snapshot of what's happening in real time. So every time the bot fires, a record will be created. You can track all of the metadata associated with it. You can track the statuses, the owners, you can pull in any information. So it really gives you a great lens, not only into, hey, are we automating this workflow, but how are we doing it? Are we trending in the right direction? Are we getting better over time, et cetera? And then actually, sorry, last thing that I wanted to point out is that we've basically abstracted all of the best sort of like DevOps practices and force people to do them. So again, to this idea, you can't force a non-coder to be a coder, but you can put all these guardrails in to make sure that they're not messing up. So in this particular case in Tonkean, you can't make any edits to production. You have to have at least one, if not multiple environments to build and test in. You have to test workflows before you publish them. You have to mark them for publishing. For example, you can see an audit log of all the changes that have been made and who's made them. There's a full history report of every time the bots run. So you can sort of triage this. This is a demo, so I don't think anything will pop up. But you're able to see like line for line, every API call that the bot tried to do, whether it was successful or not. And then most importantly, when you are making changes to like a production environment, you have to publish all of these workflows at the same time. And you're not able to publish a workflow if there are changes pending in another workflow. So again, we're minimizing the risk of somebody just willy-nilly making a change and then breaking something, right? And we're bifurcating the permissions levels where certain people will have access to publish, certain people will have access to build, certain people will have access to view, certain people will have access to add data sources, so that you as, if you are the sort of super admin, as it were, of Tonkean, you feel really comfortable standardizing and rolling this out to multiple different teams, as opposed to just being kind of like a Zapier or a one-off solution to connect a couple of tools together. So that is my demo. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so I can see the questions.
All right. Hello, everybody. So I see that we have a couple of questions in the chat. I want to thank you for joining us and go ahead and answer a few of those. And if you have more questions, by the way, it's not too late. Feel free to put them in there. So I see there's two questions that are in a similar vein, and I think I'll kind of answer them both at once. So what work does IT need to do to roll out Tonkean? And then what are we going to do? What's our approach / recommendation for training your staff on process improvement initiatives? So obviously both of these probably require a little bit of a deeper discussion, but I can absolutely answer them on a high level. In terms of your IT need to roll out Tonkean, it's just mostly about granting access to the systems and applications that we're going to integrate with. So as you saw in the demonstration, you have full transparency in Tonkean as to who can access them, which modules can access them, and what permissions that you give. So typically, think of it as like, I'm familiar with ServiceNow. You would create a Tonkean user in ServiceNow, and we would authenticate in with those credentials. And then you control exactly how many roles and permissions that user has. Now, if there's a situation where you say, okay, well, I can see well Tonkean might need to use this data for this particular module, but then I don't want it to save it. I want it to get rid of it afterwards, or I want it to be encrypted while Tonkean's using it. Both of those are options. So it's a combination of those things. What data are we going to use that we need to ensure is encrypted and we can never read? What data do we need to mess with the retention policies and make sure that, even if we can read it, we immediately delete it after we're done? Which ones are fine that Tonkean can hold on to for weeks or months? It's completely up to you how much permission you give. But that is 95% of the work that IT is going to need to do, is that the business folks are going to say, hey, I need access to Salesforce, and they're going to set up user in Salesforce for them to use. And that's where the approach and recommendation for training your staff on process improvements sort of comes in. At Tonkean, we're working with each of our clients to put together a training path for them. So we are doing it. Every client is, at this point, very much given that white glove treatment. I think our sales director refers to it as kind of bear hugging each client. And, it's our whole company is on deck. We set up a live Slack channel for you to communicate in real time. We ensure that we have a rollout plan in place before we go live. So initially, we'll help with the setup. We will help do services work with you, get some modules stood up. And then we'll do ongoing office hours with your team to ensure that there's somebody there to provide best practices, information, and hand-holding going forward. So it is a little different for each client and what they need, but those are some of the general themes that we do for each of our clients. And then there's one more question in here. And again, if I didn't fully answer your questions or if you have other questions, please put them in there. How do you charge for Tonkean? So Tonkean is I love this about Tonkean. So you can have as many users as you want. You can run as many transactions as you want. We don't charge for either of those. If you remember Ben's demo that he was just giving, there were those modules, each individual workflow within a big gray box. We charge for the big gray box. So if you have a solution for legal that contains legal's workflows, that we charge for that. And so you may have 3 or 4 for different departments. You may have 1. Again, it's totally up to you. And again, we would love to have a deeper discussion and make sure that that works for you guys and ensure that everything is clear on that. But that is the great thing about us. If you want to have 100 people using it, 1 person using it, 1,000 transactions, 1 million, totally up for you. It makes it really easy to scale it out across an enterprise. And then how does your user access control work? Well, the thing is, there's no end user UI for Tonkean. There's only the back end user who's going to be creating modules and workflows. So we follow best practice. You can use SSO and basically single sign on in. And you do have roles and permissions. So access controls for each of those users. So if there are some users that only want to see the business reports, which is that sort of transaction summary, that reporting on the back end, we can do that. If you want to have some users that can access this solution, but not the other solution, you can do that. So it's similar to other platforms. It's based on role and permission, and it's SSO to authenticate in. Again, if there's more to that question, feel free to follow up with us. But it's basically the summary is we follow modern best practices in terms of authentication and access control. All right, I think that's everything. If there are still some folks on with us, again, I just want to thank you for your time. This video is going to start replaying. Oh, and we got one more question. Do we need developers to build automation on Tonki? It looks like since no one needs to QA before building an automation, you do not need developers to build automation on Tonki. Now, I always recommend that, for instance, if there's somebody who's building a module and it's integrating with a software they've never worked with before, they don't really understand how the data is structured, and it's good to have a subject matter expert to help them understand that. Or another situation where you might need somebody a little more technical is what if it's a custom build application with a custom internal API? We absolutely integrate with it. But the initial setup of, what are the commands that are available through that API and setting up those custom actions, again, there's no scripting involved, but it's helpful if we have somebody who's a little familiar with JSON so that they can kind of pull out each of those fields and each of those actions that we can use and then present them to the business user in a no-code way. So at most, some familiarity with JSON and some familiarity with the underlying data is helpful when setting up those enterprise components. But building the automation, you do not need to be a developer, no. All right, I think that's all the questions. I'm gonna hang on for another minute or two. And yeah, I just wanna thank you guys so much for joining us. Again, one of the great things about Tonkean is that we are kind of abstracted business logic. If you're doing a workflow on sale, if you're doing a change management workflow in ServiceNow, use the ServiceNow workflow engine. If you want to orchestrate a process across all of these applications in a no-code way, Tonkean is absolutely phenomenal at that. That's why you saw he listed some of our accounts between Google and Instacart, Grubhub, and a long list of others. So we'd love to talk to you. It's all about making those handoffs smoother, and then your end user gets to stay in the interface that they enjoy using. So the change management, the organizational change, is so much lower with Tonkean than asking them to go to another portal and learn another user interface. And with that, I think we're at time. So last chance for any questions. If not, have a great rest of your day. Hope you join us again sometime. Hopefully we get to speak sometime. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.